God and Science by John W. Dawley. Copyrighted by the John W. Dawley Trust. Narrated by Michael Drew. Chapter 4. The Fourfold Calculus of Reality. A Calculus of Spiritual Ideas. In the preceding chapter, we saw how the ideas of God are revealed in an ordered sequence through the days of creation, and also how these days expand into numerals of spiritual consciousness. Our task now is to consider the ordered calculus of inspired thought through which these numerals operate. Thus we can compute and use with scientific certainty the infinite ideas of the divine mind, God. The questions arise. What must be the nature and office of such a calculus? And how is such a calculus indicated in the scriptural record? We have already considered the fundamental fact that God is infinite divine mind. Our calculus, therefore, must be one of definite spiritual thought and idea. It is impossible to have a limited, finite measurement of that which is infinitely real. One cannot have a basketful, a mile, or a yard of reality. One can only conceive of reality in terms of idea. Even in human subjects like music and mathematics, thought can only comprehend and utilize specific and diversified ideas of these subjects. How much more is it true in the realm of spiritual reality that the infinite calculus of the divine mind, God, must consist of infinite spiritual ideas and their definite and specific relationships to one another. The fact is that one can never really know anything in the realm of spiritual reality except divine ideas and their intelligent operation. The activity of spiritual ideas, which constitute fundamental reality, we generally designate in human experience as inspired thought. The question we must consider, then, is how the operation of these ideas can be intelligently symbolized and systematized for humanity's use and salvation. The necessity of a scientific approach. Here the vastly important question again faces us. How is there depicted in the Bible a spiritual calculus, or a process of reasoning by the use of symbols which one can understand and utilize? It might be said that if there were not in the Bible a divine system whereby the ideas of God are definitely symbolized, then humanity would now have to discover one, for the coming generation will not accept as fundamental the things, the ideas, of spiritual reality unless they can be intelligently presented and used on a scientific as well as a spiritual and ethical basis. This demand must be honestly faced. It cannot be sidestepped. Constant progress is even more essential in spiritual things than in any other field, and the individual who resists it is no friend of mankind. The force of evil in past ages operated spasmodically because men were accustomed to think about most subjects less scientifically than they do today. Today the forces of evil and of materiality appear to be scientifically and systematically organized, and therefore the only thing that can deal with these forces is an ordered idealism that is both scientific and spiritual. God, as an infinite cause, must be known as the divine principle of all being, and moreover, to be a very present help, God must be truly understandable and demonstrable. This, however, can only be attained through an exact understanding of the ideas which reveal divine principle. We must, in fact, awaken to our essential spiritual responsibility in this advanced age, and consider God and reality in an intelligent and scientific way, as well as on a wholly spiritual basis. If we do this, then we shall meet and defeat the onrush of materiality, and a new era of spiritual progress and attainment will begin. If we fail to progress decisively in spiritual matters, then there is nothing to look forward to but disaster and defeat. The way of today must therefore be both essentially spiritual and essentially scientific. Either we now place the facts of true religion, that is, spiritual things, on a scientific as well as on a spiritual and ethical basis, and we present its ideas intelligently, or religion is doomed to sink still further into the morass of vague emotion and mysticism, and our age will be overwhelmed by the so-called scientific conclusions of materialism, which, being wholly material, can have in them no element of true salvation. The way out is undoubtedly divine and scientific metaphysics. Webster defines metaphysics in part as follows. From meta, beyond, after, plus physikos, relating to external nature, natural, physical. That division of philosophy which includes ontology, or the science of being, and cosmology, or the science of the fundamental causes and processes in things. The primary meaning of metaphysics is derived from those discussions by Aristotle, which he himself called the first philosophy or theology, and which dealt with the nature of being, with cause or genesis, and with the existence of God. The scriptural use of the symbol 4. Having gained some sense of the order and purpose of the numerals of divine thought, as illustrated in Genesis, we must now consider the nature of the inspired calculus used in the scriptural record to represent the operation of these numerals, and also the specific symbol by which this calculus is indicated. Earlier in this book we saw that the symbol 4, derived from the 4 points of the compass, was adopted by the Hebrews, and constantly used by them to indicate 4 cardinal points of divine calculation and direction. This symbol was used in the Bible most frequently as north, east, south, and west, but also in the description of the 4 rivers of Genesis, the 4 square altar, and the 4 square oblation, and the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse, to take a few examples. Indeed, the symbol 4 pervades the Scriptures. The acme of this symbol, as the Bible uses it, is seen in the concluding chapters of Revelation, where John describes a city, a representation of exalted thought, which lieth 4 square. When John, the Revelator, described this city 4 square, which forms the climax of our Bible, it would seem that he was portraying the possibility of divine computation through the well-known symbol, used by the Chaldeans, of the north, east, south, and west. It is known that the Chaldeans were deeply interested in investigating both mathematics and the heavenly bodies, and the Hebrew writers in captivity were in constant touch with Babylonian culture. Undoubtedly, therefore, the symbolic use of the number 4 in the Bible sprang from the 4 cardinal points and the mathematical calculus of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. That the Bible begins by depicting 7 ordered stages of inspired thought, definite numerals of consciousness, and culminates in a revelation with the symbol of a 4-dimensional calculus of divine metaphysics, is a most significant fact, and gives cause for deep thought and inquiry. The Word, the Christ, Christianity, and Science. The Christian world has recognized 3 modes of divine expression, whereby thought can understand and prove reality. These 3 are the Word of God, the Christ, and Christianity. Today a 4th must be considered, and this 4th may be termed the divine science of reality. Can it be that these 4 divine expressions, the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and Science, when understood scientifically and spiritually, constitute in this age the 4 cardinal points of a compass of spiritual thought and idea? Let us consider the specific offices of these 4 categories of Christian experience. John writes, "In the beginning was the Word." We also read in Psalms, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made." The Word of God, therefore, institutes all-inspired thought and revelation. Webster calls it the actively expressed creative and revelatory thought and will of God. The divine mind, which is infinite intelligence, must forever state its own nature and purpose through specific ideas, and as men seek to comprehend the divine statement or word, it becomes available to them as revelation. The word, therefore, considered subjectively, is the infinite statement of the divine nature. Considered objectively, it is the intelligently ordered development of the divine nature to men as they earnestly seek to know God aright. Consequently, the word might be described as the divine statement or revelation coming to mankind as the inspired and ordered process of seeking. The process of seeking in all scientific subjects must naturally be ordered and can never be casual. The first 3,000 years of Bible history emphasize the operation of the Word of God, for they illustrate clearly this essential process of seeking. It has often been concluded that the Christ came to men only with the advent of Jesus, but let it be made clear at this point that the Christ is a title, meaning the Anointed. The Christ must always be God's infinite and eternal ideal, or absolute truth, and must therefore express the divine nature fully. Jesus was given the divine title of the Christ because he demonstrated this ideal conclusively. But God's ideal must ever be available. Its appearing cannot be confined to any one period. Paul, who had a truly living sense of the Christ, declared that Christ is all and in all. In the great prophetic age of Israel, men began to realize in some measure that the infinite is forever manifesting and translating itself to all mankind as the Christ, or ideal. The process of seeking God was developing into a process of finding God, which process was fulfilled when Jesus presented the Christ ideal to his age. Is it not true that in any subject we first seek, and then we begin to understand the plan or ideal of that subject, or in other words, we find God's ideal, or Christ, is forever translated and manifested, and as men seek Christ or truth, they find truth. When Jesus' supreme proof of the divine nature through the perfect demonstration of the divine ideal, both for himself and for all mankind, is fully appreciated, then humanity as a whole will be more inclined to recognize the vast importance of both his mission and his sacrifice. Such a view would remove Jesus' life and work from the mystical plane and permanently place them on the basis of the deepest Christianity and the purest science. Christianity is commonly regarded as designating the religious beliefs of the vast body of men and women who accept the teachings of Jesus. It is also a term that is loosely applied to any manifestation of the so-called Christian virtues. Thus, Christianity implies the acceptance of a standard and the conformity to such a standard. When, therefore, we accept the divine ideal, or Christ, and understand that ideal, we reflect in thought its infinite detail, and as we use its detail in our lives, we are practicing Christianity. In Christianity, every true idea must be found indissolubly identified with God himself. As men reflect and use this infinitude of divine ideas, humanity's health, happiness, and entire well-being must multiply. The fourth factor in our calculus involves the appreciation of the fact that the offices of the Word, the Christ, and Christianity are not merely inspired modes of divine expression appearing in history, but that they symbolize ever-present spiritual processes forever operating in the science of reality. We then understand the absolute science of being, and we discern the infinitude of divine principle, God, always interpreting itself through its own system of divine metaphysics. Scientific fact knows no time. The discovery of scientific fact may involve the time factor, but science itself is of the nature of eternity and ever-presence. In our efforts for achievement in any subject, do we not use the four processes of seeking, finding, using, and being? Throughout the ages, the fourfold calculus has been variously symbolized. At first, the symbol was the primitive sense of the north, east, south, and west, and of the four seasons. In modern times, the symbol has been the mathematical calculus of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. The writers in the Bible use the symbol 4 constantly, as has been shown. One of the clearest scriptural presentations of the fourfold divine calculus is seen in the 4 Gospels in the New Testament, each of which records the life of Jesus from a different point of view. They tell the same story in essence, but Matthew supported his story copiously from the word of the Old Testament. Mark based his inspired narrative on data gleaned from Peter, who recognized Jesus' presentation of the Christ. Luke, the friend of the great Christian Paul, developed the theme that Jesus' teachings were for all mankind. And John wrote the story from the standpoint of the Infinite One, God himself. In fact, what we term today the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science, which are now our highest symbols for interpreting the operation of a basic 4-dimensional calculus of divine thought and experience, have always been accepted and used by humanity, although they have been symbolized in different ways. The operation of the fourfold calculus. Let us then consider in more detail these 4 divine offices, by means of which we can compute the values and relationships of the ideas of reality, and so prove the presence and power of the Infinite One. In mathematics there are 4 basic processes of computation, termed addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and these operate through specific numerals. Our use of these processes develops and expands as we advance, but they never cease to be basic. So, in the metaphysical system of divine reality, there are the 4 fundamental divine processes of the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science, and our understanding of them also develops and expands infinitely, and they too operate and are stated in terms of specific numerals, numerals of spiritual consciousness. The reader will recall that when we considered the days of creation, we first epitomized them as they would unfold to the seeker for light, that is, as thought, purity, definiteness, spiritual power, multiplication, manhood, rest. As these days developed into higher essences and so became definite numerals of inspired thought, we endeavoured to epitomize their vast scope by 7 deeper and more essential terms, still based on the days of creation, viz. Intelligence, substance, identity, one, entity, consciousness, fulfillment. This ordered revelation corresponds to the word process, that which comes to us in the beginning, as we seek. The operation of the Christ, or the divine process of translation, must likewise express the complete nature of God, and therefore we may naturally expect this translation to take place also in a 7-fold way. But this must obviously be indicated by a different sequence or relationship of the 7 fundamental terms for the infinite, in this case governed by the fact that the presentation is from the Eternal One itself, forever translating its ideal as infinite ideas, through which we find God. It is obvious that the same range of divine tones must always come into operation, because it is one comprehensive science and system which is under consideration. Let us take a human illustration, which may give the reader a slight indication of the divine offices of the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science. Of course, all human analogies must necessarily be only partially satisfactory. Let us imagine that a teacher of mathematics is imparting his knowledge to an elementary student. The student will take the initial steps by learning the numbers and the mathematical processes of calculation. He will be seeking the knowledge of mathematics. That might illustrate the word process. The teacher, on the other hand, has some understanding of the whole plan of mathematics, and to a certain extent it is subjective in his thought. That is, he thinks from the standpoint of the subject itself. He will find simple ways through which to present the fundamentals of mathematics to his pupil. In other words, he will be translating his more advanced sense down to the comprehension of the beginner. This might illustrate the Christ process. Both teacher and student are employing the same range of numbers, the same processes, the same mathematical system, but from differing standpoints. The use made by both teacher and student of their knowledge of mathematics in order to solve various problems might be taken as an illustration of the operation of Christianity. And the fact that from everlasting to everlasting mathematics is complete and timeless and knows no errors or limits, but just is, might illustrate the fact of science. A detailed elucidation of the operation of this fourfold divine calculus is given in Appendix 2 of this book, but for the sake of simplicity, it is not embodied in the immediate text. The divine calculus becomes natural and demonstrable. We must remember that in our attempt to gain a true sense of spiritual reality, we have been forced to use symbols, but these symbols, however specific and ordered, are only for the purpose of leading thought to the pure understanding of the divine mind, God, and its infinite universe of spiritual ideas, that is, to reality itself. This must ever be the ultimate. The author is well aware of these spiritual and scientific facts, to which he has given many years of earnest and consecrated thought, may at first seem to the inquirer to be abstract. At one time they were equally abstract to the author, but as he pondered the fundamentals of reality depicted in the Scriptures, and also learned to use them, they became natural and demonstrable. In fact, they became warm and vital in his thought. What were once no more than distant symbols became living tones. As the author continued his study of the Scriptures and found these fundamentals illustrated throughout, all sense of abstraction vanished, and he is abundantly grateful that these divine tones and their intelligent operation are now as definite to him in his search for reality as the fundamentals of mathematics or music are to a student of these subjects. Moreover, his understanding of these spiritual tones has enabled him to heal and help many individuals in their difficulties, for exact spiritual thought is of the nature of omnipotence. Anyone who is in earnest and who is willing to think intelligently and on a spiritual and truly scientific basis can become equally familiar with the inspired symbols of the system of divine metaphysics and bring about similar results. Of course, it may be asking much of a man who has always considered God as a mystical being to be approached mystically, when one demands that the infinite should be intelligently considered as the divine principle and cause of all being, something far greater than any humanly conceived personality. But this is what we must eventually do. Let us take a simple, everyday illustration. The golfer remembers his first attempt to play golf. He had to bear in mind different essentials of the game, and he had to synchronize those essentials. It all seemed very strange and unnecessary. He only wanted to hit the ball. Why not do it in the old way, without all this detail? The simple reason was that chance and a casual approach did not work. If in such ordinary matters one has to be systematic, how much more is it necessary in the study of reality today? Men have generally been casual and apathetic about following up their desire to find God. They have been led to believe that the infinite ever-presence cannot be intelligently considered. Consequently, they have given less thought to knowing and proving God and reality than to almost any other subject, hence the present world conditions. Every honest man will admit that an outworn concept of God is not basic or scientific enough to meet the pressing demands of today. The devastating conclusions of material theories which tend to eliminate God from the picture must be met with absolute truth and with the deepest spiritual sense. This is humanity's only hope, but it is a very definite and real hope, although, like everything that is worthwhile, it demands persistent effort on the part of the individual. Spiritual science is no fool's paradise, nor is it the refuge of the unthinking, but it is the goal of earnest men and women who realize that the way is straight and narrow, an ordered way, a scientific way, a way which cannot be departed from if results are to be achieved.